what I've settled on for a stalking rifle for me and how I see things is you're consciously trading maybe capacity and max effective range for size, weight, and portability.
Many American shooters, I think, look at this as like a weird novelty and a handicap. Nobody buys them.
What is up, everybody? Mark on the mic here. Across from me, Mr. Ryan Muckenhirn, and special guest, very special guest, Mr. Ian Klemm. Ian, it is always a pleasure. Gentlemen, today we are going to talk about stalking rifles. Now, we've all gone on spot and stock hunts. A lot of the listeners have gone on spot and stock hunts. Doesn't necessarily mean you were using a stalking rifle. There are some nuanced differences, probably some debate as to what some might consider a stalking rifle. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the table in front of us today. And frankly, I'm pumped to talk about this.
Yes.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Welcome. Ian, what makes a stalking rifle?
Oh, wow. Okay. About, 15 years ago, prior life, I was in the UK at a conference. It went over a weekend. My counterpart there, my host, he said, well, why don't you come home, to where I live, which was a couple hours southwest of the city, and we'll do some stalking. He knew I was a hunter. It was the right time of year. Roe deer, red deer. I thought, oh, this is going to be awesome. And it was a great experience to tag along with him, but he used the word stalking rifle, and there he meant basically a short-barreled bolt-action repeater, moderated or suppressed. And he explained over the course of the weekend that, stalking means deer hunting without hounds. So, they're kind of bifurcated into houndsmen and deer stalkers. And so it was a different definition than what I had in my head of maybe more continental, Germanic, alpine stalking rifles. And for me, I think everyone's definition sort of changes a little bit depending on who and where you're talking. But what I've settled on for a stalking rifle for me and how I see things is you're consciously trading maybe capacity and max effective range for size, weight, and portability. So in preparation for this, I went into, the safe and thought, okay, what's a good representation of stalking rifles as I see them? Came to realize that a big part of my collection is comprised of them. I thought I was a single shot rifle collector and fan, and I am, but I'd say 3/4 of those would be considered stalking rifles because they're inherently short and light, and they break down oftentimes. And another part of the definition for me, I think, is chambered in a cartridge that's not in excess. So it's just potent enough to do the job, and that job specifically has to include what we consider to be big game, so deer. Anything that isn't capable of hunting deer, for me, it doesn't kind of fall into that category of stalking rifle yet. I'd put it in a different category of maybe rook rifle or small game rifle, rook and rabbit rifle, that sort of thing. So that's kind of how I see stalking rifles. It's not necessarily just a bolt action or just a falling block single shot or just a break open. It's something that is short, light, portable, and not in excess.
That's brilliant.
That is a brilliant definition, and that is, what I would essentially 100% agree with. Short, lightweight, fast handling. Like you said, a moderate cartridge. We're not trying to, big boom something at 700 yards here. It's adequate to get the job done at probably a pretty nominal distance. I'd say when you're talking optics, iron sights or a very modest scoping selection. And the other thing I'd throw in there is quiet to load, right? Because you may be loading it and unloading it in the field. So you could say, you think of like an AR-15, right? You're like, well, okay, lightweight, handy, short barrel. You could get a modest caliber, but you're gonna, chamber and unchamber around quietly with that. Not so much, right?
No.
You guys have some very elegant selections on the table here. But before I got a couple other things. But Ryan, what are your thoughts on this as we get going?
So I battled with this one on the drive in this morning because I guess a stalking rifle in my head is all the things that Ian said, but then I realized it was way more like the picture I had was a lot more theatrical. There's like this Germanic or Bavarian fellow, Scandinavian fellow. He's got a fancy Jager's hood on his head. He's wearing a
jogger's hat.
Yeah, jogger's hat. Yeah. He's got like a waxed canvas overcoat on. He's got a walking stick, and he's got knee-high lace-ups. And he's hunting through.
Some tweed involved here, perhaps?
No, that's a little too British.
That's like college professor.
Yeah.
Patched elbows.
This guy's in just one mute color, and he's got a rifle. It's not slung with the muzzle up. It's slung with the muzzle down, or it's hinged open and draped over his shoulder with muzzle forward. And he's going to go find the roe deer, or the fallow, or the red deer, or the chamois. And he's going to take like a 120-meter shot, and it's whatever rifle he's using. And that's what a stalking rifle is to me. All the things Ian said too.
Well, and regionally, Ian, where you were kind of, I guess, introduced to at least stalking with a stalking rifle, and the critters that you're talking about, Ryan, they're kind of all in that same region. To my understanding, the term stalking rifle originated in the British Isles, so in that region.
Okay. Yep. I think Ryan's idea, he did a good job of talking about, like, there's the practical side of the definition, which I tried to touch on, and then I think he did a good job of capturing the philosophical side of the definition. And I guess when I say not in excess and maybe sacrificing capacity for portability, that's getting at this idea of you heard him say hunting the red deer or the chamois or whatever the animal is. It's this idea of almost like wildlife conservation. You're not using methods that maximize the take. You're getting a little bit personal with it, and you're holding yourself to this standard of, nope, I'm going to close this distance. It's going to be an intimate experience where I take a very deliberate shot, and I've got that pressure kind of on me because I know that my first shot, maybe my only shot, needs to be extremely deliberate and high quality.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, the process and the method taken into consideration, almost that being the paramount. And then if you get one that way, then that's how you got it. I consider it like almost like a traditional archer, right?
Yep.
The method is what's important.
Yeah.
100%. And so you can say trad bow, and like everybody's got a picture of what that looks like. That could be a recurve, it could be a longbow, whatever. But then there's the traditional archer. Now, those two are distinctly different things in my head. So like a traditional archer probably makes his own arrows, probably very selective of the broadhead. There's something very interesting about the bow. It's not just a sage Samick that he picked up. It could be, but there's a whole package with it. And the first time I ever got thinking about these things was probably around 2004 or 5, and I had a Merkel catalog in my hand. And like I'm paging through that catalog, and there's they had these like Bavarian scenthounds, and everybody was in this green wool and canvas, and the hats, of course. And they had what at the time would have been probably K3s over their shoulders, and they were moving through what I'm only assuming is the Black Forest in Germany, and that was it. I was hooked. I was like, man, I got to have a bunch of these. So, yeah.
Let's talk about some of these guns that are on the table. Because even pre-podcast, we always have a little pre-podcast chatter. and I was like, oh, this podcast might even go a little bit longer than I originally thought, just because there's a lot of interesting things surrounding all of these, Ryan. So let's start with you. You've got one on the table here. Tell us about this thing and what it is, how you ended up with it, why you ended up with it, all the things.
Sure. So this is a Blaser K95, and it is, Ian said it's as good as they get. And actually the first K95 I ever saw in my entire life, I was with you. And that was at Winnequa many years ago.
Yep.
Many years ago.
Over a decade ago.
Yeah. And you took it out and I was like, oh my God, it's a Blaser K95. And you said, do you want to shoot it? And I could not believe it. And I was like, yeah. And I said, is it zeroed? And you said, it should be from last year. And you put the scope on it. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, man, this guy's crazy. And it was exactly zeroed. And
made stellar shot, by the way, offhand, little gongs. So that was our introduction.
Yeah.
At what range?
100. And so there's a piece to the Blaser system in general that is going to speak to that a little bit more, and that's their very novel mount. But so I've always wanted a Kipploff of some kind, single shot, German hunting rifle. Oh, they're not all German. There's others. There's Austrian and there's French and Belgian, et cetera. But whether it's like a Merkel K1 or a Merkel K3 or a Blaser K95, I've always wanted one. And there's a massive barrier to entry on a lot of these things because they are generally heinously expensive. What's interesting, though, is they're not popular in the U.S. Like, I know less than 5 people that own them. Whereas how many people do we know own Remington 740s, 742s, 7400s, Remington 700s, et cetera, et cetera. So when they're here, there's a small group of buyers that are looking at them and looking for them. And sometimes there's some really, really good deals to be had. And so I had actually been watching this and several others like it for a long time, like a calendar year plus change. And because they're not popular and because many American shooters, I think, look at this as like a weird novelty and a handicap, nobody buys them.
Well, and I think by and large, myself included, I fall into that camp of, maximizing performance. Like I'm not trying to limit my capability. I'm trying to extend or expand my capability.
Sure.
This isn't going to necessarily do that.
I don't know. I mean, I guess it's what's your definition of limit and what's your definition of expand? So like to speak to the rifle a little bit, it's not chambered in a caliber that I love. It's chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor, which is part of the reason that I got it for the price that I did.
Well, time out.
Yeah.
Not a caliber that you love or not a caliber you love for rifle.
For this
rifle.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so a lot of this is also, I think there's a huge romance part of this that comes into one of these things, like the ownership of, the usage of that. I mean, if you're not that kind of person, if like a bespoke or historical design doesn't speak to you for what it represents or what it did represent at one time, it's probably not a gun that's going to trip your trigger, right? In my opinion, this thing should be chambered in 7x57R, 6.5x57R, 7x65R, something other than 6.5 Creedmoor.
So I agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
However, when we go back to our definition of like, oh, what is a stalking rifle? And just talking about more commonly the attributes that cartridge will have. The 6.5 Creedmoor it's right in there.
It's perfect.
Oh,
right.
if it was developed 120 years ago,
yeah.
everyone would have had their Kipploff in 6.5 Creedmoor for sure.
Right. Yeah, 1,000%. And it's painfully cool. The rifle. Like everything about it is so interesting. One, like most of the people that have seen it, they're like, is that a single shot shotgun? Because they're used to, a hinge action, a tang on the side here or a lever on the side here, opening it up. It looks like a 410 single shot. Mm-hmm. It is not. It is a single shot rifle. It has the spirally stuff down the barrel. And It's lovely. It's extremely lightweight. Everything is like minimum dimension on it, which is, I just love that part in general about any rifle. The action design is super novel. What was Jager's first? It was a Peter Jager that developed it.
Peter, yeah.
Yeah. And that's an old design with that breech block in there. This little piece right here. That's like turn of the century.
Maybe Franz. Peter or Franz.
Okay. Yeah.
But super strong lockup.
It is Franz. It's Franz Jager.
Franz, yeah.
The receiver's alloy. The block is steel. All the strength comes from this nifty little block back here. It provides the backbone for the rifle, so that it's not going to blow up in this lightweight aluminum receiver. And then, of course, just a really awesome barrel. What I love about them is you can change the barrels very easily. It comes apart in seconds. I can take a barrel off. I can put a barrel on, so I can reconfigure caliber in, literally probably 30 seconds.
Is that something you're thinking about doing someday?
Absolutely, yeah. So like I said, the cartridge is fine. I'm not going to dog 6.5 Creedmoor because I have now several of them, but it's just not interesting enough to me. So like, there's my barrel. If I want to put a different barrel on, I simply put a different barrel on.
Son of a bee sting.
Yeah. And it breaks down into this, to quote Ian, lovely little attaché case, and it sits in there nicely. You had talked about the portability in the description, Ian, and when you and I were first introduced and we were talking about this, it came down to like the vehicles that people drive in Europe. So if you had like an Audi S3, it doesn't have a big back seat, doesn't have a big trunk. You may have a rifle. You might have multiple barrels. You want to transport it discreetly because things are different over there. And a rifle that fits into a briefcase of sorts, and sometimes with multiple barrels that can fit in the trunk of an Audi S3 is an attractive thing. But yeah, so I do plan on getting a different barrel for it. They're pretty costly. So I've got to wait for the right deal. And the ones that I like are, I think, the ones that the Kiploff guys like. So they hold on to them every so often they free up. But when they do, I like a rimmed cartridge of some kind, and whether it's 6.5 by 57R, 7x57R, 7x65R, I'm all about those. Those would be just fine.
I was going to ask if you had settled on one, but just by the nature of how availability, like, you almost have to settle on a bracket then, as far as like finding the right one.
Yeah.
One that you find acceptable at the right price, sort of deal. You're like, yeah, this one will work.
Yeah, these kind of things, fate has her hand in it a little bit.
I like that.
You take what she gives you.
Yeah, and so for this one, like, I could never afford this rifle at its book value, but because of its caliber, because of the American marketplace, it was better than 50% off. So
wow.
Yeah, I thought, it's a pretty bespoke piece, but it's one that I'm not going to get rid of, really. I've always wanted one. And so I got it, and I can't wait to scale it and to grow it and to adapt it to different things.
Have you shot it yet?
Yes, I have.
How did it shoot?
It's marvelous. So it seems to be fairly load sensitive. So like my favorite loads in 6.5 Creedmoor for my various bolt guns, it does not favor. I grabbed some factory Hornady 140 ELD ammo, and it's an absolute tack driver. And we had talked about the mount a little bit earlier. The crazy part about this mount is how repeatable it is. And as far as I'm aware, it's probably regarded as the most repeatable mount on the market. I'm unaware of anybody who can claim what they can claim, and actually it stands up. So super simple design. There's 2 pins or little pucks on one side of the mount. They correspond to a little puck slot on the other, and then these neat little pivoting locking blocks that just fold over, very discreet. So what I did is I took the rifle, I cleaned the bore out, I went to the range, I zeroed it, and then I fired around. I removed the scope. I put the scope back on. I fired around. I removed the scope. I put the scope back on. I fired around, and so on and so forth for 6 rounds. And it landed under an inch. And I just can't argue with how well that is. The vertical dispersion in the group, I'm pretty sure, was just mirage. And me being so excited about it. The trigger is unreal. It's spectacularly lightweight. That's kind of a neat part too. Would you call this a striker fire? Is that an appropriate way?
Yeah, I think so.
So the gun does not have a conventional safety. It doesn't have like a crossbolt safety. It doesn't have a hammer. You cock it by pressing the cocking lever forward.
Forward.
Yes. Now the gun is cocked. So the trigger would trip if I wanted it to. If I decided not to take the shot, I put some slight pressure on the cocking lever and I draw it back. Now the gun is not cocked.
You notice you didn't hear anything there at all.
So uncocked right now, like trigger no bang.
Okay.
There's no safety. Slide forward, gun is cocked. Now the trigger would trip. If I don't want to shoot, slight downward pressure and draw it back. Now the gun's uncocked, trigger no bang.
To me, like, it's interesting because to me it's like a rear tang. It's like a very long, quiet rear tang safety.
Yeah, that happens to be a decocker as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't even know if you can call it a safety.
I think it's very safe.
Yeah, correct.
It's very safe, and
But-
it operates similarly to several rifles that I have.
Yeah.
Not in what's happening
Yeah.
mechanically,
Yeah.
but
Something neat about hunting while it's de-energized and like you only put potential energy, you only compress that spring, right before your shot.
Yeah. And so like it can't fire this way. You can't pull the trigger, you can't throw the gun, it can't go bang. It can only go bang if I cock it.
Can you move that forward again?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I can see the trigger.
Yep. Springing. And I guess when I said striker fire, to me a striker fire is like I pull the trigger, it's charging the gun and then tripping it. There's a second step into this, but it's a neat gun, and then it's got all the other things I like about nice guns. So it's got an exceptional piece of walnut. I'm so sorry to the good folks at Blaser, but you rated this thing a grade 4, and I think I did better than that.
It is stunning.
Yeah. And it's got a Bavarian cheek piece on it. Unnecessary effort to make an ornate look. It's not more functional than some other cheek piece, but it is lovely. And again, when you look at the gun, it looks heavier than it is. It's so thin through the wrist. It's got a subtle palm swell. Everything about it is just so petite and so lovely, and it handles like a Ferrari. It's so cool. To shoot and to hold on to and to bring to the shoulder, and shooting it offhand, despite its weight, it has a ton of control, which I really appreciate. Because my plan is I'm going to hunt the snot out of the thing. In fact, I'm taking this to Wyoming pronghorn and mule deer camp this year. So
Love it.
yeah. But yeah, it's a neat gun, and there's a lot of these out there. Well, not a lot. There's a few of them out there from a few different companies, all European. I'm not aware of a Jaeger design in the U.S. from anybody, but Merkel and Blaser are probably the two most popular. Sabati, I don't know if they still do. They have or had a single shot, Jaeger style breech block gun, very reasonably priced. I've never seen one for sale in the U.S. I've only seen pictures of it online. Really neat guns, and then you can go. I mean, if you want to get a really, really, really fancy one, you can. If you want the price of a very good used truck, you could buy one of those, Krieghoff, so on and so forth.
When you're on your mule deer hunt this year,
Yeah.
do you plan to have a follow-up shot kind of at the ready? And if so, what's your plan for that?
Yeah. So I'll have a single cartridge in my offhand. And so that was one thing, like it not being a rimmed cartridge and me not working with, aside from a Ruger number 1 that I used to own, that I no longer, it's very freeing to say that, by the way.
You're past the breakup
Yeah,
period.
correct. That gun had an ejector. So if I'd open the rifle, if I dropped the falling block, boop, the case would come out, and I could just throw another one in. It's very quick.
Would it eject all the way, or enough that you would pull it out?
I'd eject all the way.
Okay.
Yeah. So you'd manipulate the rifle in a fashion that it would fling out. If I kept it level and I slowly opened it, it would probably hit the safety lever and kind of stop it there. But
Okay.
it'd kick it. It doesn't. It has a very simple mechanical extractor. Like another thing I love about these is how ridiculously simple they are. Like there's a half a dozen moving parts. And their extractor is just actuated by an interference up front underneath the barrel here on the action, just pushes it back and lifts the case out. And I was worried that 6.5 being a rimless design would be prohibitive to like moving the thing quickly. And definitely not the case. And so with my left hand single cartridge in there, if I open that rifle, my index finger is right next to the loading port. I can hook it and flick it out, and it flies out, and I can set the other one back in and close it up, and it's ready to go. It's amazingly fast, despite being one round.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen some really cool videos, like I don't know what you'd call them, like a hunt test, where the shooter's getting ready to like get his license for the year, and he's got to go do this hunt test where he's shooting a Kiploff of some kind, like a Blaser or Merkel, and he'll have like a wristband on, and there'll be some cartridges in it, and they do like a running moose target, and he'll hit it 3 times in like 4 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's just understanding the body mechanics and trying to figure out how to get everything down pat. But I'm not especially concerned about that. And most of the time you take a shot, you come through recoil, you're a little discombobulated, you cycle out, you find your bearings again, and then you get back on target. Unless you've got a really, solid rest, and a low recoiling rifle. You don't see a lot of people necessarily pull the trigger, cycle out, and they're just right back on it. Like a really proficient shooter with a bolt gun should be. So I'm telling myself that I'm going to use that time between detonation, recoil, discombobulation, etc., to then go through the reload cycle and get back on target. But I'm going to, of course, limit my distances. I'm going to find a load for a bullet that I really like, and I'm going to really pick my shot. So hopefully I don't have to.
That's what I was going to say. By the nature of the rifle and how you intend to hunt it, not that things can't go wrong, but
they always do.
You're putting yourself in that position where hopefully there really aren't any question marks of, I better reload fast.
It subconsciously, it makes you more conscientious. Yeah. It's like you've got that in the back of your mind where, okay, I'm holding myself to this standard. It's my responsibility now to make a really good shot.
One thing I see with this rifle that's actually shared with a lot of the ones that you brought here, Ian, and we're going to get to these, and I'm very excited to, is the
sling point.
The sling point on the barrel. I mean, we've talked about barrels before. We talk about, influence on barrels. We've talked about barrel tuners, timing, putting, stock pressure on barrels. And then I see these beautiful rifles with the sling point attached to the barrel.
Yeah, so it's another piece of evidence that suggests the pendulum is swinging towards mobility, actually moving with the rifle, not necessarily shooting the rifle, as often as you might shoot a heavier, bigger bolt gun, moving with the rifle, stalking with the rifle, and then obviously you're not gonna, have a bunch of sling pressure on your barrel when it comes time to make your shot. But it's configuring the rifle so that oftentimes stalking rifles are used in sort of like a solo hunt manner where you're on your own. They're light because you're the only person packing out that game animal, and you're the only person moving your camp. So they kind of need to be short, handy, and light. The less to carry, the better. But that sling point up there is so that you can have that abbreviated forend with the schnabel tip and not have to have a overly large forend with sling provision on the forend itself.
Gotcha.
And yeah, any undue influence that you have on that barrel during movement is then abandoned when it comes time to actually make your shot. You know, you're shooting off of sticks, or you're doing something that's a little bit more responsible to make a good shot, rather than, you know, having a bunch of sling tension on that point.
Cool. Anything else, Ryan?
I've got to get the fancy hat yet. Those are hard to come by in the U.S. I have to import that thing from Germany.
No kidding.
A hat, yeah.
Well, better get to it.
No, like I said, I'm terribly excited to hunt it. It's one of, I think, my favorite pieces in my collection, because I can actually look at it, touch it, feel it, and put scratches in it, and do all the things that I want to do with it. Because I have it now, and it's really cool. Comes with the neat little attaché case. It's actually TSA approved, although I don't think I have the stones to put it in that case in a cargo hold. But it is neat. I'm really excited to continue to test the limits of the mount, because I can't put it in its case with the scope on the barrel. So it breaks down into 3 parts: stock and receiver, barrel and forend, and then the optic separate. And in the small test that I did, it's like on the button. But I plan on taking this out to like the 300-yard line and fire a shot, take it off, put it back on, fire a shot, see what actually shakes out at like a practical max of my hunting distance.
Well, we had watched some videos a little while back. I think you were actually showing them to me, or we were talking about this. I can't remember. We're looking at them together. I was astounded with the repeatability.
Yeah. So that would have been a Blaser shooter with like probably a 260 or 6.5 by 55 in an R93 or an R8.
Okay.
You're shooting playing cards. Does that sound familiar?
Could be.
Yeah.
I don't recall. I just remember him just like, okay, apparently you can just take your scope on.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's something that we're not really used to until we experience something like this. And that's the same mount that's shared between, you know, the K95, the R93, the R8. And those rifles are chambered in what calibers?
So I think the biggest you can get K95 in is 300 Weatherby. The R8s, I mean, they go up to 500 Jeffrey, 505 Gibbs. I had a friend at Blaser, excuse me, that was recoil testing the big ones. So like on the small end, 416 Rem Mag, on the big end, 500 Jeffrey and 505 Gibbs. And he sent me the list of rounds that he had fired and the quantities of, and he was asked to stop at like 63 with 500 Jeffrey, which is an unbelievably huge cartridge. That's like, you want to anchor a Cape Buffalo where it's standing, even if it's running, 500 Jeffrey. And you know, those guns are neat too. They're repeaters, but they're also very petite. You know, they're very scaled for what they are, or scaled down for what they are. You'd think they'd be much larger to facilitate a cartridge like that, but a completely different design and mechanism to arrive at a centerfire big game rifle than what we're used to in the United States.
I don't think I'm interested in shooting a lightweight, handy, petite 500 Jeffrey.
No. The biggest I've shot an R8 in is 375. Actually, it's very pleasant. Stock design is very pleasant, and like conducive to recoil mitigation and management. And this one, you know, for as light as it is, I shoot this thing all day. Really, really interesting gun. Build quality is top. Ian was teaching me about the barrel steel. Whatever they're doing with this is different than what we do here.
Mm-hmm. Up to a certain caliber, they actually hammer forge not only the rifling, but the chamber with the rifling. They have a single mandrel that has chamber geometry and rifling up into a certain aspect ratio. They can do that. And boy, does it yield a hard and aligned and accurate barrel.
I mean, wow. It is supremely accurate. At least with the 140 ELDs that I've been shooting, going to figure out how to make a Barnes shoot out of it, or a Nosler AccuBond, or something like a tougher bullet, you know, that I generally like to shoot. What's also cool about these, and I don't think it would be one that I would necessarily be personally interested in, but like, this is a very traditional looking gun. You know, it's walnut, It's got a fancy forend tip, a fancy grip cap, fancy check ring. They also make them in synthetic and carbon, and they look like something out of outer space. So when especially their carbon guns, like it's still the same action, still the same barrel, still the same scope mount, but full treatment to the stock in total carbon.
A very organic shaped thumb hole, Yeah. For the ultimate lightweight, high performance Kiploff.
And they are like mega lightweight at that point. Mega expensive too. You can even get them with leather sewn into the grip panel.
A synthetic,
But with leather.
With leather.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have all wood stocked versions on the table here, but to your point, a stalking rifle is not, you don't have to exclude a synthetic.
No.
And even it doesn't have to be as fancy as the one that you're talking about right now. I mean, that's where you get into the form and function component from a practicality perspective. That synthetic, for how you're going to be using these rifles, if you don't want to be the type of person that's going to worry about scratching your wood, you're crawling, you're stalking, you're maybe in dense vegetation, you're doing these things, all the things that I generally like a synthetic stock for.
Yeah.
What's funny about the synthetic one, like just the synthetic, so you can get just a K95 black synthetic, they're about the same price as the wood. They really aren't that much different in cost. And I'd like to think that that's the stock makers and the gunsmiths over there being like, you really should just buy the wood.
Yeah.
It's somewhat of a penalty, but no, I mean, it's cool. I'm glad they do it, and they kind of have to, because a lot of people love the utility of that stock design. If I'm going to have a rifle like this, it's going to wear a piece of walnut like that.
Well, and also it does make for the consumer, for the buyer, it makes, at least mentally for me, it would make it easier for me to buy the wood stocked version, knowing that I might chip it up a little bit. But if I was able to save a bunch of money by getting the synthetic one, then I might do that and be like, yeah, then I don't have to worry about scratching it. And I'll get the synthetic one, I'll save all this money. But I'm like, well, if it's all things are equal here, I'm just going to get the nice one, and if I ding it up, I ding it up a little bit.
Yeah, and having the options of synthetic, I think it gets more people into the stalking rifle ethos, which is more important to me than adhering to some purist, recipe of what it should be. Like, some of mine have threaded barrels for suppressors because, that just makes a lot of sense for what I'm trying to accomplish with this thing. So I don't think it has to be this, hyper traditional elitist type form factor.
Right. I like it. Ian.
Okay.
What is going on here?
So Ryan owns this K95, and that is my favorite rifle of all time, which is saying something because I have a couple rifles. But that is, I became aware of it probably around the same time, early 2000s. I was getting ready to graduate undergrad, and it was something that I just had up on a pedestal. And one day I'm going to, aspire to own this thing and to use it. And so it became my long-term goal, the K95. But until then, I still wanted, my stalking rifle. So here's my first one, and I kind of made it. It's a Brno, so Czechoslovakian, and Eastern European quality, so strong and good, but its stock was like Baltic birch. It looked like dimensional lumber that someone had put, Thompson's water steel on.
That's exactly the finish stain too. Slight opacity and a little brown.
Its metal finish.
If you have some left over, you can do your deck.
Yep. Its metal finish was like the coarsest grit of garnet you could blast something with to hide machining marks and whatnot. So what I did was I bought that thing for $250, and it was chambered in 22 Hornet. So back to my kind of quasi definition, not big enough in my opinion for stalking deer. So that wasn't really a stalking cartridge. So the first thing I did was I cut the barrel off. I used the existing monoblock and a high force soldered in a replacement barrel for it. So this is a barrel that I chambered in 6.5 by 52 rimmed, otherwise known as 25-35 Winchester. So that to me was like, okay, just enough to go stalking deer and everything under, but not too much for such a small rifle. I made a quarter rib for it, affixed that, barrel band, sling swivel, like you pointed out, Mark, barrel band, front sight. It did
You
not.
made these things.
Yep. No, I modified this from New England Custom Gun, made this from scratch. That was just a piece of bar stock that I milled and smoked and fitted to the barrel contoured the barrel. The barrel is a soldered, silver soldered and pinned into the monoblock. But then, like the forend hardware here, so I made the stock out of a piece of black walnut. Actually, ironically,
No kidding.
Yeah, it was a piece of black walnut I had.
That's a dandy piece of black walnut.
It's not bad, right?
Yeah.
But it was such a small piece that no one wanted it, and I thought, well, there's enough room there for my little forend and stock out of it. This I salvaged from some old beater shotgun. I took the forend iron out of that and then fit it to this new barrel and my forend that I made. So made it a takedown where it wasn't a takedown before. So I had to solder on this hook onto the barrel. But now I had my takedown Kiploff that I could put in a travel case for basically sweat equity, $250 and some patience.
Incredible.
Do you remember what shotgun that was out of?
It was like a Yildiz. I don't even know how to pronounce it.
Yildiz, yeah.
Yeah. But it was like an orphaned forend that no one wanted. So it was like in a parts bin for $10.
Yes.
Picked that out and just grabbed the iron out of it.
Here's what's especially spectacular about this and why I like old world European rifle manufacturing. Is very uncommon to see like two of the exact same thing. Like so often, if I'd have like commercial Mausers come into the gun shop that had not been molested, military Mausers, and they were set up for hunting, there was a smith in probably Suhl, Germany, that was building it for a shooter, and it had adornments and accoutrements that were specific to that application. Whether it's a unique scope base or a unique sight.
Oh, yeah.
Or, a full-length rib or a quarter rib. Like, something was always special about it and, like, not the same as every other gun. Because that was, like, that guy's rifle, the one. And, like, that is exactly what that is.
Yeah.
That is fantastic.
And then this is, I used to collect vintage optics. So this is a Hensoldt of Wetzlar, Germany. They made this little scope. They called it the Diapi Kurz for short.
Sure.
Fixed 2 1/4 power, steel tube. I forget, it's like a 20 millimeter, 22 millimeter main tube, so around 7/8 of an inch. But I thought it just fit that little rifle pretty well. So that's poor man's K95 to keep me going in the interim.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
You talk about your Eastern European. You gotta.
You do. Yeah. Yeah. But no Franz Jaeger lockup. Obviously, just a simple cross lock. I pilfered that from
Ruger
a
1022.
Ruger 1022. Yeah.
There you go.
Good eye. The brake cleaner cleaned off the white enamel on the inside of the diamond there. Almost threw you off. But I had to, reshape the lever. The lever was like this giant square looking thing. And I made a new crossbolt safety. So I'm left-handed, or I shoot left-handed anyway. So I had to actually re-engineer the crossbolt safety to operate in left-hand configuration.
I'm going to just say this. You are built different. Just love it.
Yeah.
Where did you develop the skills to be able to do something like this? I mean, how many... Like, I would need to attempt this 100 times before I finally get, like, the one that, like, it... And even then, it's, like, not even going to happen. Like, it's not even on my radar to be able to do something like that.
I think Ryan is probably the same way where, we've just been making things along the way our whole lives. Before this, it was, learning how to machine so I can make motorcycle parts for old bikes that I couldn't buy the parts for. So just sort of over time, through osmosis, you end up being crafty. I don't know.
Ryan's taking his ears off.
Isn't that something? Okay.
Have you hunted this rifle?
This one very sparingly. So I was living in DC at the time, and the opportunities were pretty few and far between. So I was sort of satiating my desire to do hunting by, doing the gunsmithing thing in the garage. And every once in a while, I'd make the 2-hour drive to the C.F. Phelps public BLM land, essentially, and do some hunting there. But the population density was such that I spent most of my time just avoiding the other orange in the woods instead of actually doing real hunting.
It would be fantastic, at least in my head, if you had access to a large piece of private land and you just went stalking and still hunted through and were able to take a deer with this thing.
Yeah.
Which I know you could do here.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Did you stamp caliber on it?
I didn't yet.
Okay.
Nope.
What's cool about that cartridge, and it has a complex European name, and in the U.S. it's 2535, which so many people look at as like barely a varminting cartridge.
Yeah.
And so, Winchester 1894 would have been chambered in it. The Winchester 64 was chambered in it, a smaller smattering of lever guns. Perfect fit for a single shot stalking rifle. What a neat cartridge.
It's sort of, I read an article a while back, and I think that's probably what seeded it in my mind, was they called it a woods loafing cartridge.
Love it.
You know what I mean? It's sort of like a possibles. Like, you might see
a fox.
Squirrel. You might see, a tender fawn that you want to take for the freezer.
Man.
Okay, number 2.
I have to interject here because I was telling Ryan this was, sometime earlier this year, but I'd gone out and I'd brought my coon collar. I had my Ruger 1022. It was squirrel season still, and apparently it was possum season as well. But I'm like, Ryan, I just had the most lovely day in the woods. I was walking around. I got a nice squirrel that I ended up eating for dinner like the next day or something like that. I didn't end up calling any coons, but and I ended up missing the possum. Actually, it was at a fairly extended range, but it was like it brought me back to my youth. And Ryan's like, "Yeah, you were just walking around the woods with a gun."
Exactly.
And I was like, "It was amazing."
Yes. No expectations.
Yeah.
Just, whatever fate throws at you kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just like this sweet freedom of just exploring, enjoying the day, walking around with a gun.
It's like going for a walk, but isn't it better just to have like a skinny little rifle with you at the same time?
Because who knows what may.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's on that too. Like drillings are still a thing in Europe, and from Blaser, from Merkel, and from a couple other folks over there, you can still buy a drilling. And over here, I see them wildly devaluated unless they're super like bespoke, like a Krieghoff or something, because they have people don't perceive them as being practical. Because why do you want a double 16 with an 8x57 under the bottom of it? Well, because you might be walking through the woods, you might flush a capercaillie, you might flush a black grouse, you might bump into a red stag.
Mm-hmm.
The gun can handle it. And so, that's really neat, man. That's a cool gun.
So another one that I grabbed just for a sample is another modest one. So I wanted to, the listeners and watchers to see another example of what could be considered a stalking rifle that is pretty accessible, pretty attainable. So this one is new to the collection. It's only maybe 2 or 3 months since I picked this up, but for essentially the same amount of money that you could buy, a Ruger American Predator for, or something like
goodness.
that. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Yep. You got to watch because they don't come up every day. But this is from Husqvarna. So that Husky, 426 Farm Boss chainsaw that's in your shed, same company, and it's actually chambered in 30-30 Winchester. So this looks like, something akin to like a Remington or a Winchester Model 69 single shot 22 in terms of size and form factor and everything, but it's actually a 30-30 bolt action single shot, what I consider to be the bolt version of a stalking rifle. So a couple neat things about it. It's cock-on close. The bolt root, the bolt handle root serves as just a massive locking lug. Sort of like the split rear bridge Mauser 71, just scaled down. Flag safety a la Mauser. It actually shoots pretty darn good. Flat top checkering, Prince of Wales grip. Not a bad piece of walnut from back in the day. This one is the vintage is probably mid-20s, 1920s. It's a little steel butt plate. Still has some case color.
I was going to say that case color on the trigger is still well intact.
Yep. But this would be on the walking stick side of the equation because it's not a short barrel. It's like a 25 or 26-inch barrel.
Right.
Octagonal barrel. They were cheaper to make octagonal back then. But just a very svelte, single shot stalking rifle.
I didn't know that these existed until you had told me about them. You know, every time I think about Husky, I think about strong, modest doubles.
Yep.
And then, of course, very famous Mausers, right? Or Mauser pattern rifles. And, which are still to this day, I think, desirable for somebody who wants that kind of gun. And held in very high regard, like supremely accurate rifles and very, very functional guns. I didn't know that these existed. The first example I've ever touched is in my hands right now, and it's probably the third example I've ever seen. The rest were all just on pictures. Knowing that you can get it in 30-30 or 25-20 and 32-20,
yep,
and then 45-70 is just fascinating. And what's 30-30 metric? It's 7.62 by 51R.
Yeah, I think so.
Which is fun because people see 7.62 51 and they're like, it's 308 rimmed.
You'll notice the caliber stamping on the barrel flat on the other side there is simply, what do they say, just like 30
30
cal.
equals 7.60 millimeters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a cool gun. What a fun rifle to hunt with.
I was going to say, this is another one that you need to go hunt.
Oh, yeah. We're pretty fortunate in Wisconsin in that we have a pretty ample supply of white-tailed deer and very, very high opportunity from a tag perspective to go test rifles.
Yeah. Yep.
That bolt, when you unlock it, goes vertical.
Yeah. Not very conducive for optical sights.
I was going to say, you're pretty...
Hence the sight radius.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's neat. And a short range and a long range sight on there?
Yeah, so it's a toggling instead of like a flip leaf with a fixed. It's a toggling rear sight.
Oh, wow.
Have you monkeyed with that yet?
Not yet. No.
No. What did you shoot for a load? Hand load or a factory?
Dad actually, basically, I'll get a new rifle and I don't have enough time to tinker with it like I want to. So he's retired. I'll hand it off to him and then he'll work up a load.
Yeah.
And in about a week, he'll hand it back with a box with handwritten notes. And I think what he settled on, I think it was like a 170 grain flat point. Your typical, what you'd expect to hunt deer with your Marlin 336 in Wisconsin woods. But the proverbial paper plate target, all holes but one out of a 5-shot group touching at 50 meters. So
how do you?
It actually shoots.
How do you argue with that? Do you think it would be strong enough for a modern, like a?
It could be. I'd want to do some research just to make sure. Like they made these from like the late 10s. To, I believe, the late 60s.
Sure.
So pretty long lived production run. So there should be some data towards the end of that run that, is relevant.
Do you know when this one was made?
I think from what I can tell with the serialization, it's going to be mid to late 20s.
Okay.
So between wars.
And then just simple extraction.
Yep.
I'm looking at the cutout on the bolt face there, and that's so cool. That is such a nifty rifle. 25-20. You can hunt deer with it. It's about as low on the scale of.
Wasn't the world record that Jordan or that Peterson buck?
I think it was shot with a very marginal cartridge.
Yeah.
I knew an old boy when I lived up in Fargo that he hunted with a 92 in 25-20.
Okay.
And I met him through a guy I worked with, and this guy was like 300 years old when I met him. And they would bring him deer driving, and he would carry that 92. And he shot a deer, and this guy that I knew was processing it with him, and he was finding those little slugs just barely into the thoracic with him.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he was picking up whatever Winchester fodder he could get. He didn't care. It was probably an 80 grain soft point for all we know. But yeah, that would be just such a cool rifle to goof around with. 30-30 would be just awesome.
Yep.
25-20 would be really neat. That would be really neat. I've got this thing in my head. I want to kill a deer with a 25-20.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll keep my eye open for you.
And I was like, oh, I'm going to get a nice 92, but I'd rather have one of these. It'd be cooler.
Yeah. Okay. Number 3. So this is an example. We saw a break open. We saw a bolt action. This is an example of a falling block stalking rifle. This one is from 1903, Nagel and Menz of Baden-Baden, Germany. So this is the Hirn patent falling block, and it's like the other falling blocks we've seen in the past. We brought in a Ruger number 1 and a couple others, but this one's a little bit different in that it's got an operating lever, but it hinges in the rear instead of the front, so it's just backwards of what you'd normally consider, dropping the block with a hinge in the front. But this is an example of a rifle that I would put in that subcategory of definitely alpine mountain stalking rifle. So this was made, they had obviously steel butt plates, maybe not recoil pads at the time, but they had steel butt plates, but this was chosen to be butt plateless with just some texturing, some checkering there on the butt for grip. It's got the Alex Henry treatment to the fore-end tip for shooting off of sticks that you'd have in the Alps. It does have a full-length rib on its 21-inch barrel, but very thin, slender barrel. Basically, just enough to get the job done.
Well, that fore end is incredibly slender as well.
Oh, exactly. They don't really make them like that anymore. So this was minimally dimensioned, yet chambered in a stalking rifle cartridge, right? So this is in 8x58 rimmed sour. So I did, since that one isn't as familiar to folks, I did throw a cartridge in my pocket so we can see, but it's basically like a 3240 Ballard or maybe a 32 Winchester Special. So it's a 170 grain bullet going about 1900 feet a second.
So right in there with 30-30.
Yeah.
I've just maybe a tick below.
Yep.
Are you able to source brass for that, or are you making brass?
It should be correctly head stamped on the back there. I think that one was made by Bertram in Australia.
God bless them.
Yeah.
I mean, truly.
You can make it from, the other rimmed sour cartridges, so 9.3 or necking out the 6.5, which I also have a Kiploff in 6.5 by 58.
It looks like a tapered straight wall.
Yeah, very much so. Yep.
So it's like a transition cartridge from black powder to nitro. And there were so many of this vintage in this area, because you says 1903.
Yep.
Yeah. And that was convention. Like bottleneck cartridges were pretty racy and new at that point in time, and a lot of these were carryovers. God, so cool. 8x58R. That is so wild. So
another neat feature of the rifle is you notice that it's got kind of a weird looking trigger. This is a single set trigger. To set it, you would place your thumb on the back of this second portion here and push forward. You see that sort of nests inside each other. So now it's a very, very light trigger. This happens to be an extension of the hammer, and it serves as a decocker as well.
Sure.
So you can decock the rifle, you can set the trigger, or if it's just plain cocked, you have this as the hunting weight of the trigger.
Gotcha. And when it is to the rear, separated there,
de-energized,
it is decocked.
Yep.
Gotcha.
So this is literally contiguous with the hammer that fires the firing pin.
So it goes from decocked to cocked to very light.
Yeah, set would be very light. But this whole rifle, as it sits, weighs 4 pounds, 13 ounces.
That's the coolest part about them because they look big.
Yeah.
When you look at that receiver, you're like, oh, that thing's going to be a bit of a pork chop. But that's the total of the mass plus the barrel. There's nothing else to them.
Yep.
Typical German fashion, just brilliantly engineered.
For 122 years old. Yeah.
Well, what's also interesting with this one, it's got that, I guess, Monte Carlo style stock, and from the side, I'm like, oh, that looks chunky. And then you look at it from the rear.
It gets real narrow.
And it gets real narrow.
Yeah.
It's deceiving.
Yep.
What an absolutely beautiful rifle. My God. Case hardening still intact underneath there.
Yep.
Thing's never seen the sun. All hand fit parts too, which is the coolest thing about them. It's like why I like old guns. Somebody cut the check ring by hand on the front. Somebody cut the check ring on the trigger. Somebody, engraved the various screws that go into it.
I do have a scope. I took it off it was a little distracting, but it's a double claw Sewell's type QD mount.
Yeah.
Which was kind of the thing of the day back then.
Have you tested its repeatability?
I have not.
Yeah. They were also renowned for being quite repeatable. Gosh, is that cool? I have a very strong fondness for stipple style engraving because it's so simple, but functional and attractive.
Yeah.
And just seeing that.
So that's 4 pounds, 13 ounces. The Husky is 5 pounds, 13 ounces. So 1 pound more, but it's all in the barrel, basically.
Sure. That makes sense.
You ever seen those pleasure Mausers?
Hmm.
Commercial Mausers. Usually they were in 7 or small 8. And they had a full rib on them. I always thought that was so cool, seeing a full rib on a bolt rifle. Like it's mostly just aesthetic.
And in Germanic style, the arduous nature of craftsmanship, like they had to start with that much more steel and carve it away.
Yeah. Golly, is that cool?
Yeah. What is the full rib for? Like, why does it have that?
It's basically to demonstrate craftsmanship. I mean, there's slight function to it in terms of it gives you a sighting plane, but you're really looking above that when you're talking those iron sights.
I imagine that the engraving on it is hammered in. They wouldn't have been rolling back then, would they?
I'm not an expert on that. I don't know.
And I'm wondering if they had just a tool, they would set the tool, dink, hit it, move it, dink, hit it, move it. But it's dizzy enough that you can't see that there's an interruption. Maybe it's rolled. I don't know.
It also gives a little bit of meat, Mark, to dovetail in inevitable scope mounts if someone wanted one back then.
Okay.
Do you have any of the older, especially European optics that have the front ring like fit or braze to the objective?
One. I've got one. Yeah. It's not one of the larger objectives.
Sure.
I think it's a vintage Jenna that is like a 32 millimeter steel tube that, it's fitted directly to that tube or the objective bell.
A carryover from years past. So if you look at like American long rifle culture, all those guys were probably Germans anyways that had immigrated to the U.S. and they brought a couple of things like the takedown wedges and inletted them. So if you pick up like a Hawken, you're going to find the same design in that Hawken stock from the 1860s.
Yeah.
Takedown wedge pounded out, fore-end comes off.
Ryan, do you notice the texture on the front of the trigger guard?
Yeah.
That's actually for your thumb in offhand shooting so that you can stabilize the rifle. Reverse. There, almost. Very close. Yep, right there. Without wrapping over, so you're yep, just like that. They would actually use their thumb in that fashion for stabilizing an offhand shot.
Do you have any gallery rifles?
No.
About 30 seconds ago, when we were talking about the craftsmanship, I was looking at that specific part saying,
Why?
And I thought it was just an example of this person essentially being an artisan and doing extra for the sake of extra. And then here you talk about the practical function of it.
Everything's intentional on these things. Like there's ornate stuff, but like every touch point, it all makes sense when you unpack it like that.
Yep.
That's pretty
And
cool.
the thing I like about the Hirn is notice that the breech actually starts in the same plane as like your trigger face. That's very atypical for even a nice compact falling block. It means you save an extra 2 inches on overall weapon length. And look at how you've got more of a vertical grip than you're used to seeing for a 122-year-old gun. I mean, usually they're very open.
Yeah, you look at either of those, or even the Blaser's pretty swept. They're more abrupt than the old Blaser, but yeah, they kind of knew what they were doing, didn't they?
Yeah.
Nagel and Menz.
Okay, last one. This one, still a stalking rifle. In fact, it was sold as the Butch Cersei BS1 stalking rifle. So it's on the upper end of what I would consider to be a stalking rifle, but when you consider its philosophy of use, so this is in 375 Holland & Holland. It was made as a stalking rifle, but not for this continent, probably for Africa. So if you're going for a walk with a rifle, you still want it to be a nice trim, falling block like this is great, but, up the caliber too. Instead of minimum required for deer, maybe minimum required for other things.
Right.
Yeah. But this is kind of neat. We talk about stalking rifles being a little bit more portable than normal. This is a takedown. So this button here, let's see, you need kind of 3 hands to do it, but I think I can do it for you here. You press this button, it releases a latch, and then you give it.
The rolly chair is not helping.
You give it a 60-degree turn to one side, and you basically have interrupted buttress threads that create a takedown system. And what I should do is I should have lever released for these tally rings so that I can just pop those off and have those separate. But now you've got, the other part of the stalking rifle is they kind of asked to be taken, on adventures and traveled with. So now you've got something that's way more portable for going over to Africa.
What year is this one, do you think?
This one, I believe,
era,
is 2010.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. So
it does not look 2010 to me.
because it's got some of the, tip of the hat to case color hardened receiver. It's got, this is a copy of a Martin Hagen falling block action. Butch Cersei is a U.S. guy out of California, since retired, but kind of neat that, it's all U.S. made, but, sort of a homage to some of these European rifles we're talking about.
One of the very few examples of a U.S. gun maker doing a rifle like this. There's 1885s, which are similar but different, and then Dakota number 10s, which are drastically different. And then Cersei made doubles, beautiful doubles, very highly regarded doubles, and they were like the last place that you could get an American-made double that was something else. I guess you could probably from CSMC and Galazan get something done if you wanted, but nobody else is making a double really in the States. That's a lovely gun. How does this one shoot?
This one shoots great. So far, it's just been, your lighter loads. Yeah. So the cheapest 250 grain, bullet I can find, and not at blistering speeds. So it'll be a little bit before I actually probably get to hunt with it.
Sure.
And then you just snap it to the left until that latch clicks, and she's back together.
That's neat. Quarter rib on there, which I love. Safari style sights, hooded front. That is the full treatment.
But a much more substantial.
Yeah.
When we're talking stalking rifle, that's a different breed.
Well, it is, and early on we're talking about these moderate cartridges, if you will, but like you pointed out, contextually, like a 375 H&H would be considered moderate, or the starting point for like your dangerous game type stuff, or maybe maybe you're not even pursuing dangerous game, but you might be around them or something like that. This is cool.
Ejector gun or extractor?
Extractor. Yep. Roller top tank safety. Nice piece of wood.
Yeah. Mark and I were just doing a fair amount of shooting with 375 the other day.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I just discovered that Hammer Bullets makes a 137 grain 375. It looks like a proverbial flying ashtray.
Yeah. That's for shooting pronghorn. 137. You'd be able to get warp speed with that for sure. That's pretty neat.
So kind of a smattering showing different bookends.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've really, you guys did a great job of, number one, procuring these things and having the background and knowledge to describe their various attributes and nuances. And man, like I was talking about earlier, that day that I just spent out with the 1022, which actually made me want to go spend a day out with my Savage 22 over 410. If you're looking or thinking about, or maybe you're thinking about now after this podcast, going on a hunt where you walk around with a gun.
Yeah.
Man, if this doesn't inspire you to do that, I don't know what will.
And that's a big thing with these rifles too. For me personally, there is some sort of deep-seated ancestral tradition that I can pull out with a rifle like this and feel a certain kind of way when I hunt with it, you know?
Yeah.
Which I think is really interesting. Golly. Especially this little Brno. That thing is neat.
Well, that one is so cool in particular just because you have so much of you is in that rifle.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, and it sort of
you're the
bookmarks,
craftsman. Like we're talking about craftsmanship here. You're the craftsman.
It makes it neat to use.
Yeah.
When you look down, you forget what you're holding every once in a while, and you look down, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember inletting that. And
how many hours do you think you have in that?
Oh man, it'd be like an hour here after work, an hour there after work. So it's sort of you have to be semi-obsessive, I think, to be a hobbyist and do that a little bit. But I'll check the stock at some point too, so it's finished. But
the stock dimensions I'm especially curious about because it reminds me a lot of like a Dakota 10.
Yeah.
How swept it is and how small it is.
Yep.
Did you have a pattern, or did you just say this is what's in my head?
No, it was what's in my head, and it was literally like I made a template on an Amazon box, and then it went to the bandsaw and started cutting. And my favorite part of the process, to be honest, was you do the inletting while it's still relatively square so that it fits in vices and whatnot. And then once that's all smoked in and you've got really good percentage contact on your inlet, then you go to town with number 49 or 50 Nicholson rasp, and that's just like it's like unwrapping a Christmas present. You actually get to see, okay, what's the wood going to look like at the dimensions where, I don't know who said it, you just remove everything that isn't a stock.
I love that.
And it goes quick.
That's so neat. That is a lovely little gun.
The only personal experience that I have that could potentially connect with what you're talking about is when Jim and I went and built self bows with clay haze.
Sure.
Much of clay went into those bows, but just removing that wood and shaping the grip and things like that. And actually that was probably the part of the bow that I was the most proud of was the grip.
Yeah.
It went from nothing. And I can't, I'm the type of person I'm like, hey, asking questions like, I don't want to screw this up. And Clay he kind of like, pushed me out of the nest with that part of the bow. And it turned out, really how I like it and perfect in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Did I ask, did you kill something with this yet?
No, I haven't. Yep.
Yeah, that'd be a fun one too.
Yeah.
We got to go doe hunting again.
Yeah. That would be fun.
We talk about it all the time. Let's go because we do have such liberal, long seasons, extra doe-only seasons, where you don't have that necessary pressure that I feel of like, oh, if I go out with something that's limiting, am I going to miss my opportunity at that big buck?
Yeah.
Where this is, you're just trying to get one.
Yeah, I'm middle-aged, and I think I've got the majority of my hunting yet to do in terms of where I am, with my experience. I've done a lot of armchair hunting and daydreaming. I'm basically a daydreamer that collects guns, and hopefully someday I'll be able to use some of those rifles in the collection. But I picture low stress, antelope, doe, And this might not have killed anything in over 100 years.
Yeah.
You don't know. And so that would be kind of neat too, to sort of put it back into the realm that it was supposed to live in.
Almost in some ways, like bring it to life a little bit again.
Yeah.
That's that romance of the ownership that I'm talking about, and why I like old guns is I don't necessarily know the story, like where they were. I can make it up in my head, and then to bring it out. Like when was the last time that thing saw a bullet down its bore before you took possession of it, right? Or where did it chase something? Where did the scratches in the stock come from?
This thing here might have fed a Scandinavian family for like generations.
Yeah, absolutely. And like that's the coolest part about them. And then that they had expressed purpose. They weren't general issue. Like this is the thing that we use to acquiesce meat, which is really cool, really cool. And there's a lot of care put into them, even the simple ones, to make them right. I like it.
I love it. Thanks, guys. Anything, we leave anything on the table in regard to stalking rifles? We have a lot of stalking rifles on the table.
We do. I don't know. Let's get out and go stalking.
I like it.
We can't shoot turkeys with rifles in Wisconsin.
True.
We're going to have to wait a little bit.
I know. That's the problem.
Well, I don't even have one yet. So
Not yet.
Kind of. I mean, you could consider some of my guns. I actually, when I think of the guns that I own, many of them, they may not be of any of these eras, if you will. They're not wood stocked, but they are short, lightweight, handy, bolt action rifles.
That's the deal. I think, Ryan, you just bought that carbon stalker relatively recent. I mean, it's got it in the name. It's of the same family. They're related for sure.
Well, look at that new Tiki that I have.
Yeah.
20-inch barrel.
Yep.
You know,
Minimum dimensions.
petite.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. Cool. Well, there you have it, everybody. Ryan, Ian, thank you guys. Truly, truly enjoyed this one. If you don't have a stalking rifle, you probably want one after this podcast. I know I do. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Start scouring the interweb for yours. We'll catch you on the next one.
See ya.
Bye.
There you have it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, give this video a like if you liked it, comment something below, and give us a subscribe to the Vortex Nation podcast channel. It would mean a lot to us. Also, why don't you give us a follow over on Instagram while you're at it, at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'd love to hear from you over there, and we'll keep you updated with all kinds of cool photos and videos from our adventures that we do here. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Thank you again. Happy hunting and shooting, everybody. Have a good one.